Hansel and Gretel, lost in the wood, their path, a maze, that led to no good. But then, a portal they did find, and stepped through it, with curious mind. The other side was strange and wild, a land where magic freely smiled. Peter Pan and lost boys they met, and soon, they too could fly, you bet. Their troubles seemed so far away, in Neverland, they could just play. But soon, a villain did appear, Captain Hook. His plans were clear. The battle lines were soon drawn up, a fight to save the island, no let up. But Hansel and Gretel, brave and true, joined forces with the lost boys too. Their plan was cunning, bold, and bright, to take on Hook, with all their might. With swords and magic, they fought strong, until at last, the battle was won. And so, our heroes did prevail, their courage and bravery did not fail. But what lies next, in Neverland, only time and fate can understand. Welcome to Neverland, a place so grand, where Peter Pan and the lost boys stand. Hansel and Gretel, new to the land, quickly learn to fly, with feet off the sand. They soar and swoop through the air, seeing Neverland without a care. Tinker Bell, a fairy so bright, guides them through with her tiny light. They explore the island, so wild and free, finding magic in every tree. Talking animals, and mermaids too, a wonderland, like a dream come true. The lost boys show them the ropes, teaching them games, and daring hopes. A world so different from their own, where adventure and fun are always grown. But as they rest under a starry sky, they hear the sound of a foe nearby. Captain Hook, with his crew of pirates, threatens to take over, with selfish desires. So, our heroes must stand and fight, to save Neverland, and all that's right. For the magic and wonder to always be, for all to enjoy, and to be free. Hansel and Gretel, with hearts full of zeal, set out to help, with a sense of appeal. Neverland needs them, that much is clear, as they embark on a new frontier. They join forces with the lost boys, fighting back against the pirates' noise. With swords and bows, they stand strong, against Hook's crew, and all that's wrong. The battles rage, both day and night, as they defend the land, with all their might. The mermaids join in, with a beautiful song, a symbol of hope, and strength to belong. Hansel and Gretel, with a newfound skill, use their wits, and magic, to thrill. With Tinker Bell's help, they fly so high, overcoming obstacles that try to defy. But as the days wear on, and the fights persist, our heroes begin to feel the strain of the twist. For Hook's forces are many, and the odds not great, yet they push on, to ensure Neverland's fate. And in the end, our heroes do prevail, for their bravery and courage do not fail. With Hook defeated, they rejoice and cheer, for Neverland is saved, and all is clear. Hansel and Gretel, with hearts full of pride, stand tall, with the lost boys, side by side. For they know that Neverland is their new home, and they will protect it, no matter where they roam. Hansel and Gretel, with friends by their side, explored Neverland, with wonder and pride. They roamed through forests, and over the sea, discovered new lands, and creatures so free. From the mermaid's lagoon, to the mountains so high, they experienced it all, with a gleam in their eye. They befriended fairies, and talked with the trees, and heard ancient stories, from the wise old breeze. But as they journeyed on, they soon realized, that there was a problem, that they couldn't disguise. A darkness was lurking, that threatened the land, an evil force, with an ominous brand. It was the shadow, a creature so fierce, a bringer of fear, and a soul to pierce. It had to be stopped, before it could spread, for Neverland's fate, was hanging by a thread. Hansel and Gretel, with courage and grace, decided to find, the shadow's hiding place. They searched high and low, through the darkest of nights, guided by faith, and the stars' guiding lights. With the lost boys by their side, They entered the shadow's lair, with nothing to hide. They fought with magic, and swords so bright, bringing the shadow out of the night. In the end, our heroes prevailed, their bravery and skill never failed. They banished the shadow, and brought back the light, ensuring that Neverland would be all right. Hansel and Gretel, with pride in their heart, knew that they had played an important part. For they had saved a land so pure, a place they loved and would always adore. Hansel and Gretel, with hearts full of joy, enjoyed the beauty of Neverland's ploy. They played with the mermaids, and danced with the trees, laughed with the fairies, and felt the ocean's breeze. But something was missing from their new home, a family to call their own. They didn't want to roam. So, they set out to find a place they could stay, a cozy little cottage where they could lay. With the lost boy's help, they scoured the land and found a spot that felt just grand. A cottage so quaint, with a garden so bright, a perfect place to rest for the night. They cleaned it up and made it their own, decorated it with love and a happy tone. With Tinker Bell's help, they made it just right, a place that glowed with a warm, inviting light. And as they settled in, they felt so content, for they had found their new home, heaven sent. They cooked and played and told stories of old, a family so tight, a new story to be told. With the Lost Boys and Tinker Bell, they shared their dreams and all that they felt. They knew that Neverland was their new place, a land of magic and endless grace. And so, they lived in peace and love, a family so strong, and a place so above. For Hansel and Gretel had found their new start in Neverland, forever in their heart. Hansel and Gretel, with friends by their side, lived happily in Neverland, their joy couldn't hide. They played and explored and learned so much, a life so full with magic and such. But one day, they heard a cry in the night, a sound so mournful, it gave them a fright. It was Wendy, the girl who flew, lost in Neverland, not knowing what to do. They rushed to her aid, with a sense of urgency, for Wendy was lost, in a land of such diversity. They searched the woods, and the mermaid's lagoon, hoping to find her, and bring her back soon. With Peter's help, they scoured the skies, and finally found Wendy, with tears in her eyes. She had been captured by the pirates so vile, and held captive on their ship for a while. Hansel and Gretel, with bravery and might, decided to save Wendy, with all of their sight. They planned and plotted, with the Lost Boys too, a rescue mission that they had to pursue. With swords and magic, they fought the pirate crew, a battle so fierce, it was quite the to-do. But Hansel and Gretel, with heart and skill, defeated the pirates, and saved Wendy still. And so, they returned to Neverland's shore, with Wendy safe, and nothing to deplore. They rejoiced, and celebrated, their victory so sweet, a triumph of love, and a tale to repeat. For Hansel and Gretel had proven once more that their courage and strength were truly hardcore. And Neverland had become their home, a place where love and magic had truly grown. Hansel and Gretel, with hearts full of glee, lived in Neverland, a place so free. They played with the mermaids, and flew with the birds, and enjoyed the beauty of Neverland's words. But one day, they noticed something was amiss, the fairies were missing, and they didn't know why this. They searched high and low, through the trees and the skies, but the fairies were gone, with no goodbyes. So they decided to investigate, with care and with love, for they knew that the fairies were a gift from above. They asked the Lost Boys, and Tinker Bell too, and they realized that something was due. A dark force was looming over Neverland's light, a villain so cruel, who caused quite the fright. It was Captain Hook, the pirate so mean, who had captured the fairies, and made them unseen. Hansel and Gretel, with their hearts full of rage, decided to act and bring the fairies back on stage. They gathered their friends, and plotted a plan to defeat Hook, and bring him to a ban. With courage and might, they stormed Hook's ship, a battle so fierce, it made the waves flip. Hansel and Gretel, with sword and magic, fought against Hook, in a battle so tragic. But in the end, good triumphed over the bad, and Hook was defeated, with his ship turning sad. The fairies were rescued, and brought back to light, and Neverland was safe, with magic so bright. And so, Hansel and Gretel, with their friends by their side, lived in Neverland, with joy and with pride. They celebrated their victory, with songs and with dance, for they had saved Neverland, with their bravery and chance. Hansel and Gretel, with wonder in their eyes, explored Neverland, with such great surprise. They discovered new lands, and met wondrous creatures, and enjoyed the magic of Neverland's features. But one day, they stumbled upon a strange place, a hidden grotto, with a mysterious face. It was dark and eerie, with an eerie sound, and Hansel and Gretel felt a shiver go down. But being the brave ones, they decided to explore, for they were curious, and they wanted to know more. They entered the grotto, with a sense of caution, and discovered a secret, with a wondrous motion. The grotto was home to a fairy queen so grand, who ruled over Neverland, with a delicate hand. She was beautiful and kind, with a magical power, and she welcomed Hansel and Gretel, with a charming flower. She told them of a treasure, a secret so rare, that could only be found, with a magical dare. It was hidden, in a faraway land, a place so mystical, it was hard to understand. Hansel and Gretel, with their adventurous hearts, decided to go, and explore the parts. They journeyed through forests, and mountains so high, and finally found the treasure, with a great big sigh. It was a chest, made of gold and silver so bright, and it held a magic that was quite the sight. Hansel and Gretel, with the treasure in hand, returned to the fairy queen, in Neverland. They presented the chest to the queen with pride, and she opened it up, with a magic so wide. It revealed a spell, so powerful and rare, that could heal the world, with a great big flare. And so, Hansel and Gretel, with their hearts full of glee, helped the fairy queen to use the magic key. They healed Neverland, with the power of the spell, and saved the land from the shadows of hell. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel were known far and wide for their courage and spirit, and their magical guide. Neverland was a place where magic could grow, and Hansel and Gretel were its heroes, you know. Hansel and Gretel, with their hearts full of grace, lived in Neverland, in a magical place. They had friends aplenty, and adventures galore, and they loved every moment of Neverland's lore. But one day, they noticed something was not right. The sky was turning dark, and the stars lost their light. A shadowy presence was looming so near, and it filled their hearts with a sense of fear. They knew it was time to stand up and fight, to defend Neverland with all their might. They gathered their friends from far and wide, and together they stood with courage and pride. The shadowy force was a creature of night, a monster so dark, with an evil might. It fed on fear, and it caused great strife, and it threatened to end Neverland's life. Hansel and Gretel, with their swords and their spells, led the charge against the creature from hell. They fought with great fury, and with all their might, and they banished the monster into the eternal night. The skies cleared up, and the stars shone bright, and Neverland was saved from the endless night. Hansel and Gretel, with their friends by their side, celebrated their victory with great joy and pride. And from that day, Neverland was a place of peace, where magic and love would never cease. Hansel and Gretel, with their bravery and heart, became the legends of Neverland's art. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they roamed, with their hearts full of love, and their spirits at home. They had seen it all, from the highs to the lows, and they knew Neverland, from its rivers to its glows. But one day, as they journeyed through a field of gold, they stumbled upon a sight to behold. It was a castle, with walls so grand that it seemed to stretch to the faraway land. They approached the castle with a sense of wonder, for they knew that it held a magical thunder. They walked through the gates and saw the beauty within, and they knew that this castle was a place to begin. The castle was filled with rooms and halls so wide, and it held secrets that they could not hide. They explored each nook, and they wandered each hall, and they marveled at the art that adorned each wall. But as they ventured deeper, they sensed something amiss, a feeling of danger that they could not dismiss. They followed the trail, and it led them to a door that held a secret that they could not ignore. The door opened with a creak and a groan, and they entered a room that was not their own. It was dark and eerie, with a sense of dread, and they knew that this room held secrets that led. They searched the room, and they found a hidden key that unlocked a door to a magical spree. They entered a garden that was lush and green, and they knew that this place was something they had not seen. The garden was home to a fairy queen so fair, who ruled over the land with a delicate care. She greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so bright, and she showed them a world that was full of light. The world was filled with magic and love, and it stretched beyond the skies above. Hansel and Gretel, with the fairy queen by their side, explored the world with a sense of pride. And from that day, the castle became their home, and the fairy queen, their guide to roam. Hansel and Gretel, with the magic they found, lived in Neverland, forever spellbound. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they played, with their hearts full of joy, and their spirits unafraid. They had seen it all, from the dark to the light, and they knew Neverland, from its dawn to its night. But one day, as they wandered through a forest of green, they heard a sound that they had never seen. It was a music that filled the air, and it seemed to come from everywhere. They followed the sound, and it led them to a clearing, where they saw a band with instruments so endearing. The band played on with a rhythm so sweet, and Hansel and Gretel felt the music's beat. The band was led by a fairy so bright, whose wings were aglow with a magical light. She greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so fair, and she invited them to dance without a care. Hansel and Gretel, with the fairy by their side, danced and swayed with a magical stride. They felt the music flow through their veins, and they knew that this moment would never wane. The music played on, and the night went by, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they could fly. The fairy led them to a place so grand, where they saw a concert with a magical band. The band played on with a rhythm so sweet, and Hansel and Gretel danced to the beat. They swayed and twirled with a magical grace, and they felt like they were in a mystical place. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they strayed, with their hearts full of wonder, and their spirits unafraid. They had seen it all, from the old to the new, and they knew Neverland, from its sky to its blue. But one day, as they journeyed through a desert so dry, they heard a rhythm that made them sigh. It was a beat that they had never heard before, and it seemed to come from a distant shore. They followed the sound, and it led them to a tent, where they saw a band with a rhythm so bent. The band played on with a beat so wild, and Hansel and Gretel were immediately beguiled. The band was led by a man with a guitar so fine, whose voice was a sound with a magical shine. He greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so broad, and he invited them to listen to his music with a nod. Hansel and Gretel, with the man by their side, listened to the music with a magical glide. The rhythm was new, and the beat was so fresh, and they knew that this music was worth the flesh. The man played on, with a rhythm so wild, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a child. They swayed and jumped, with a rhythm so true, and they knew that this moment would forever imbue. The music played on, and the night went by, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they could fly. The man led them to a place so grand, where they saw a party with a magical band. The band played on, with a beat so true, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a slew. They swayed and twirled, with a rhythm so free, and they knew that Neverland was where they wanted to be. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang, with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they roamed, with their hearts full of love, and their spirits so bold. They had seen it all, from the sky to the ground, and they knew Neverland was where they were bound. But one day, as they journeyed through a valley so green, they heard a rhythm that was like a dream. It was a melody that they had never heard before, and it seemed to come from an open door. They followed the sound, and it led them to a hall, where they saw a band with a rhythm so tall. The band played on, with a beat so strong, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they belong. The band was led by a woman with a drum so grand, whose beats were a sound with a magical stand. She greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so wide, and she invited them to dance by her side. Hansel and Gretel, with the woman by their side, danced and swayed with a magical glide. They felt the rhythm flow through their bones, and they knew that this music was where they wanted to roam. The band played on, and the night went by, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they could fly. The woman led them to a place so great, where they saw a festival with a magical plate. The festival was grand, with a beat so true, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a few. They swayed and jumped, with a rhythm so sweet, and they knew that this moment was forever to keep. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang, with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they wandered, with their hearts full of joy, and their spirits so inspired. They had seen it all, from the forest to the sea, and they knew Neverland was where they were meant to be. But one day, as they walked through a grove of trees, they heard a rhythm that made them weak in the knees. It was a sound that they had never heard before, and it seemed to come from a faraway shore. They followed the beat, and it led them to a cave, where they saw a band with a rhythm so brave. The band played on, with a beat so deep, and Hansel and Gretel felt it in their feet. The band was led by a man with a horn so bright, whose notes were a sound with a magical light. He greeted Hansel and Gretel with a nod and a wave, and he invited them to dance and rave. Hansel and Gretel, with the man by their side, danced and swayed with a rhythm so wide. They felt the beat coursing through their veins, and they knew that this music would forever remain. The band played on, and the night grew long, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they belong. The man led them to a place so wild, where they saw a party with a magical style. The party was grand, with a beat so true, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a few. They swayed and spun, with a rhythm so sweet, and they knew that this moment they would always repeat. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang, with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they played, with their hearts full of wonder, and their spirits unafraid. They had seen it all, from the hills to the shore, and they knew Neverland was where they wanted more. But one day, as they ran through a field so green, they heard a rhythm that was like a dream. It was a beat that they had never felt before, and it seemed to come from a distant shore. They followed the rhythm, and it led them to a meadow, where they saw a band with a rhythm so mellow. The band played on, with a beat so chill, and Hansel and Gretel felt it in their bones still. The band was led by a girl with a guitar so bright, whose strums were a sound with a magical light. She greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so wide, and she invited them to join in the vibe. Hansel and Gretel, with the girl by their side, danced and swayed with a rhythm so divine. They felt the beat flow through their hearts, and they knew that this music was where they wanted to start. The band played on, and the sun went down, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they owned the town. The girl led them to a place so cool, where they saw a concert with a magical pool. The concert was grand, with a beat so true, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a few. They swayed and bounced with a rhythm so sweet, and they knew that this moment they would forever repeat. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure. Hansel and Gretel, in Neverland they roamed, with their hearts full of wonder, and their spirits at home. They had seen it all, from the sky to the sea, and they knew Neverland was where they were meant to be. But one day, as they walked through a path so green, they heard a rhythm that was like a dream. It was a sound that they had never heard before, and it seemed to come from a far-off shore. They followed the beat, and it led them to a hill, where they saw a band with a rhythm so real. The band played on, with a beat so strong, and Hansel and Gretel felt it all day long. The band was led by a boy with a drum so bright, whose beats were a sound with a magical light. He greeted Hansel and Gretel with a smile so wide, and he invited them to join in the vibe. Hansel and Gretel, with the boy by their side, danced and swayed with a rhythm so wide. They felt the beat coursing through their veins, and they knew that this music would forever remain. The band played on, and the night grew long, and Hansel and Gretel felt like they belonged. The boy led them to a place so wild, where they saw a party with a magical style. The party was grand, with a beat so true, and Hansel and Gretel danced like a few. They swayed and jumped with a rhythm so sweet, and they knew that this moment they would forever repeat. And from that day, Hansel and Gretel knew that music was magic, and it could make dreams come true. They danced and sang with a joy so pure, and they knew that Neverland was forever secure.